Welcome to Share Talk. Today we have George McDonaugh, who's the CEO of Kryptonite1 PLC. They are the NEX exchange listed investment company looking around the blockchain Bitcoin space. And yesterday there was some news out about your investment in the Cosmos project, George. But if you could just give you a brief background of your own working history and how you came to set up Kryptonite1 and what the company actually does.
Sure. Yeah. So I used to work in marketing. I was a copywriter, and I got given a project to look at online payments for a particular mobile phone company. This is about 6 years ago, and through that research project, I came across Bitcoin. By some magical chance, it entered into my brain, and I kind of worked out how it worked. And then I think it was within 2 months of discovering it, I'd given up my job and decided that I was going to do whatever I could do in the space. Originally, my plan was to kind of market Bitcoin startups, but of course, back in early 2011, there weren't that many of them. So I taught myself to trade, and basically, I think just as I was starting out, Litecoin appeared, and the altcoin market began to develop. So I guess I've been in it for a long time, from the early days, and Kryptonite1 came about as a sort of piece of the blockchain ecosystem began to fit into place, called the smart contract world, or essentially it's basically Ethereum, but there are other providers of that kind of blockchain. And we began to see companies building on these smart contract platforms, and they were funding themselves in a new way. They were holding sort of token sales, crowd sales, mainly because the blockchain space is, by necessity, or at least various areas of the blockchain space by necessity, are open source. So they're not that interesting to VC money because there's no IP to hold. And so these companies that are building these distributed applications effectively have to crowdsource their funding, and in return for the finances, they give out a use case token, as it were, a token that has some kind of functionality on the platform when it comes into existence. And we began to see this emerging economy take place, and Kryptonite1 was set up to invest in these what we call ICOs, or token offerings.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the term ICO, it's a coin offering as opposed to the sort of the IPO term. If we look at yesterday's RNS, can you just tell us a bit about how much you've invested and why in this Cosmos project?
Sure. So the Cosmos project is a little different to what we're normally looking at. We're normally looking at projects on the Ethereum ecosystem, but there are obviously other projects happening outside of that space that are very interesting, and they hold these things called ICO. So it's initial coin offerings. It's actually beginning to change to ITO, initial token offering, because token is actually a much better description of what these cryptographic assets are. And so Cosmos has been a project that's been underway for quite some time. It's built on an even earlier piece of blockchain technology called the Tendermint consensus protocol. And what Cosmos are looking to do is produce what's called the Internet of Blockchains. So you have various blockchains now sort of in the wild, as it were. And to some extent, these chains can't communicate with each other. And what, if you can imagine it as a sort of layer cake of different chains, underneath all these layers, in theory, could sit this new project called Cosmos that allows chains to interoperate with each other. And so as a piece of technology looking forward into the future, it could play a very important role. Now, in terms of the token that they're giving away, the token they're giving away is called an atom token. And what this allows holders to do is effectively secure the network, or to sort of validate the network as these packets of information are sent between blockchains. And in return for securing the network, as a validator holding atoms, you effectively stake your atoms. You put them into some kind of bonded contract, whereby if there is an issue on the network, the validators can have their atom stake revoked from them. So this is very much the model of how blockchains are incentivized. They're done through this value mechanism. Essentially, people bonding their tokens to the network. But in return for doing that, in return for securing the network, you get an amount of the fees, the transaction fees on the network. So if you can imagine lots of chains trying to talk to each other across this thing called the Cosmos Hub, which they're building, that could, years from now, be a huge amount of transaction volume. And as an atom holder, you get recompensed in line with the amount of transaction volume. Sorry if that's got a tad technical, but that's essentially what the Cosmos project is.
No, the devil's in the detail, as always, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
I read the RNS, and part of the first paragraph was actually saying they raised $16.8 million within half an hour of opening this to the public.
That's a clear indication of what the blockchain ecosystem sees in terms of value of this particular project. Various blockchains that are emerging from the ecosystem have a big following. Certainly, some, the easiest example is Ethereum, which currently has around $1 billion market cap. But those people who are sort of steeped in the technology and understand where it's going can see the need for the chains to communicate. Because I suppose the best way to look at it is that there is a big network effect across all blockchains happening. The whole decentralized blockchain movement is in itself expanding out into the mainstream world. Cosmos and other projects like it, there are other projects that they'll interoperate with as well. Projects like that are trying to harness the network effect and push it, allow everyone to sort of expand out into mainstream enterprise sort of faster and as a more cohesive whole.
Sure. And you mentioned at the back end of March that you'd actually disposed of some of your Golem project tokens and your Melonport tokens at quite a substantial sort of increase in your initial purchase of those. So, do you want to give us a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, in some regards, just as a sort of precursor to that, I'd say that our investment in Cosmos is very much down to our investment in Melonport to some degree, because Melonport, as a distributed asset management protocol, not necessarily, but to some extent requires Cosmos to exist in order for it to gain full functionality. So because we went into Melonport to the extent that we did, we always knew that we would be following that up by going into Cosmos as well. But that's just as an aside. So our main focus is to first of all understand these crowd sales and get into them in the correct way and to the amount that we feel is pertinent. But then we also have to bring what's called city discipline to essentially disposing of these tokens once they've come to market, so as to regain the capital we've put in. And we've done that very successfully, as that announcement suggests. We took out our initial stake in Melonport, so we'd put 100,000 in. and we took 100,000 out in the region of about, I think it was around 8x, 8 times. So we've done exactly what we'd hoped to do, which was prove the model, and then take out what we'd put in, and then we keep the rest and essentially wait until that product comes to market. And the what's the word? The maturity of the project very much designates the value of the token. So it's a waiting game now. It's basically, and it's the same with Golem. It's the same with Golem. Golem is our disposal of Golem tokens follows exactly the same format as that. We're getting out what we put in, and then we're going to manage the remaining tokens in line with the specific project's roadmap.
Sure, no problem. I mean, if very briefly, can you sum up the sort of next 6 months potential activity for Kryptonite1, and why would potential investors look to invest in yourselves?
Okay, well, going forward, the the plan is very much the same, which is to isolate projects that are what we call have the requisite team traction and tech. So are the team good? What's their traction looking like? What's the technology looking like? And if you have a reasonable idea of what the ecosystem is looking like, you can see projects that appear to try and solve major problems well, not major problems, but areas that are as yet untapped. For the next 6 months, that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue to look at projects and continue to participate in crowd sales and to manage what we get from those crowd sales. In terms of giving people an idea of why this area is exciting, I'll try and do this quickly, but to all intents and purposes, what's beginning to come out of this blockchain ecosystem is something that looks very much like a new kind of internet, a sort of decentralized internet, as it were. The current internet has various layers on it: TCP/IP, SMTP, DNS. These layers that allow things like Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook to exist. They sit on top of this internet stack, and in the normal world, as it exists now, these layers are not monetized. But in the decentralized world, because of the way blockchains are incentivized, these layers are necessarily monetized. And so if the ecosystem begins to expand how people expect it to expand, to some degree, the tokens and assets that we're investing in are the elements that allow TCP/IP, SMTP, and DNS to exist. So to some extent, you could say we're investing in how the new internet is going to work. But obviously, one has to buy the fact that a new internet is emerging in the first place to be interested. I personally think that's what I'm watching happen, but obviously, everyone has their own opinion on that.
Okay, George. Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of potential there, and we thank you for your time this morning.
No, not at all. It's good to talk.
Again, that was George McDonaugh, the CEO for the NEX exchange listed KR1 Kryptonite1 PLC. Thank you, George.
Cheers then. All the best. Thank you.